Okay, now let's go on. We've got IELTS listening part 4 and it's notes completion with one word only. And remember, whatever you miss in part 3, you have a chance to get it in part 4. Because part 4 and part 1, they are similar. How are they similar? In part 1, we have one word and or a number. And part 4, we have one word only. Okay? In part 1, there is a dialogue. But in part 4, there is a lecture. One person will deliver the lecture. You have to listen and answer the questions. So complete the notes below. Write one word only. There is no number, nothing else, just one word only. Ocean biodiversity. This is the topic for part 4. And in part 4, there is always a lecture like that, based on science, technology, research, and all that. Ocean biodiversity. Biodiversity means different type of species which live in the ocean. Right? Biodiversity, ocean biodiversity. Now, they say biodiversity hotspots. Hotspot is important area where they have that biodiversity. Okay? Areas containing many different species. Important for locating targets for. Now underline important, locating targets for dash. Now locating targets for what? Right? So for locating targets, for target, they can use the word key area. Right? For example, what is your key area or what is your target? Target and key area, they are synonyms. Now whatever they say, key areas for, targets for. Let's see.
I've been looking at ocean biodiversity. That's the diversity of species that live in the world's oceans. About 20 years ago, biologists developed the idea of what they called biodiversity hotspots. These are the areas which have the greatest mixture of species. So, one example is Madagascar. These hotspots are significant because they allow us to locate key areas for focusing efforts at conservation. Biologists can identify
key areas for focusing efforts at conservation. That's what we call conservation. So correct answer is conservation. Please listen to it again.
Of what they called biodiversity hotspots. These are the areas which have the greatest mixture of species. So, one example is Madagascar. These hotspots are significant because they allow us to locate key areas for focusing efforts at conservation.
They allow us to locate key areas for focusing efforts at conservation. Important for locating targets for conservation. Okay, let's go on. Now we've got Boris Worm, 2005. They talk about sharks. Just underline the word sharks. Sharks की बात करें तो audio यहाँ पे आ गई. Found that ocean hotspots were not always rich in. अब कौन सी चीज है जो वहां पे नहीं थी? Were not always rich in का मतलब है कि ओशन में कौन सी चीज है जो नहीं थी. ठीक है, आपने फोकस करना है कि कौन सी चीज है जो कि वहां पे नहीं थी. अब देखें कौन सी चीज है जो वहां पे नहीं थी. इसके लिए वो ये कह सकते हैं कि हमने 10 एरियाज को चेक किया, सिर्फ 3 एरियाज में सॉल्ट था, बाकी 7 में नहीं था. तो आंसर क्या होगा? वर नॉट ऑलवेज रिच इन सॉल्ट, या कोई भी ऐसी चीज. ठीक है, सो लेट्स सी.
Then a Canadian biologist called Boris Worm did some research in 2005 on data on ocean species that he got from the fishing industry. Worm located 5 hotspots for large ocean predators, like sharks, and looked at what they had in common. The main thing he'd expected to find was that they had very high concentrations of food, but to his surprise, that was only true for 4 of the hotspots. The remaining hotspot was quite badly off in that regard.
Okay, the remaining hotspots were badly off in that regard. That regard का मतलब है food. Correct answer is food. इसका last part दोबारा focus करें.
Then a Canadian biologist. The main thing he'd expected to find was that they had very high concentrations of food.
main thing expected to find was the very high concentration of food.
But to his surprise, that was only true for 4 of the hotspots.
That was only true for 4 of the hotspots. तो क्या मतलब है? Were not always rich in food. Question number 33. Had higher temperature at the, अब हम बात कर रहे हैं ओशन की, तो ओशन में हायर टेम्परेचर कहां पे होगा? बॉटम पे होगा, सरफेस पे होगा, मिड में होगा, तो that's what you need to find out.
But what he did find was that in all cases, the water at the surface of the ocean had relatively high temperatures, even when it was cool at greater depths.
Okay, the water at the surface had the higher temperature. So correct answer is surface. Right? Just focus this part.
The surface of the ocean had relatively high temperatures, even when it find was that in all cases, the water at the surface of the ocean had relatively high temperatures.
Okay. अच्छा जी, question number 34. Had sufficient dash in water. अब कौन सी चीज है जिसकी मिकदार पानी में काफी ज्यादा थी? Sufficient dash in water. Maybe.
However, this wasn't enough on its own, because he also found that the water needed to have enough oxygen in it. So these 2 factors seemed necessary to support the high metabolic rate of these large fish.
All right, water needed to have enough oxygen. Sufficient की जगह पे word आ गया enough. Right answer is oxygen. और oxygen को word में लिखें, O2 नहीं लिखना. लिख सकते हैं, but just write oxygen, okay, as they said. Next, Lisa Balance, 2007, looked for hotspots for marine dash. Now, something related to marine. Marine life, marine energy, marine this and that.
A couple of years later, in 2007, a researcher called Lisa Balance, who was working in California, also started looking for ocean hotspots, but not for fish. What she was interested in was marine mammals, things like seals. Okay. And she found 3
But she was interested in marine mammals. और उसके बाद उन्होंने आगे mammals का नाम दिया. वो नाम नहीं लिखना. You will just write mammals. हाँ, अब ये, this is important point. How do you spell mammals? M-A-M-A-L नहीं, double M. पहली चीज है double M. M-A-M-M-A-L-S. ठीक है, अब अगर मैमल्स के स्पेलिंग गलत हो गए तो आंसर गलत होगा. और गलती से भी किसी से पूछने नहीं है स्पेलिंग दाएं बाएं. एक क्वेश्चन के चक्कर में पूरे टेस्ट का सत्यानाश हो जाएगा. टेस्ट कैंसिल, रिजल्ट डिलेड एंड ऑल दैट. ठीक है, सो करेक्ट आंसर इज मैमल्स. अच्छा जी, क्वेश्चन नंबर 36. सेंसस ऑफ मेरीन लाइफ फाउंड न्यू ओशन स्पीशीज लिविंग अंडर द डैश. आप अंडर का वर्ड अंडरलाइन करें. अच्छा, अंडर के लिए 3-4 वर्ड्स आ सकते हैं. एक आ सकता है बिलो, एक आ सकता है बीनीथ, एक आ सकता है ओवर या कवर्ड बाय, कोई भी ऐसा वर्ड. ठीक है, अब आपने देखना है अंडर व्हाट.
So now people who want to protect the species that are endangered need to get as much information as possible. For example, there's an international project called the Census of Marine Life. They've been surveying oceans all over the world, including the Arctic. One thing they found there, which stunned other researchers, was that there were large numbers of species which live below the ice, sometimes under a layer up to
large number of species which live below the ice. अब under की जगह पे word आ गया below और आंसर क्या हो जाएगा? ice. अब क्रीम नहीं साथ लिख देना कि मुझे तो आइसक्रीम पसंद है. ओके, yeah, all right. Okay, next is global marine special assessment. अच्छा, पॉपुलेशन साइज दिया हुआ है. इससे पहले कुछ भी पढ़ने की जरूरत नहीं है. पॉपुलेशन को अंडरलाइन करें, जियोग्राफिकल को अंडरलाइन करें. अब जब पॉपुलेशन बोलेगा तो इसका मतलब है वहां पे पहुंच गया. जियोग्राफिकल बोलेगा इसका मतलब है यहां पे आ गया. रेट ऑफ डैश. अब रेट ऑफ को अंडरलाइन कर लें. रेट ऑफ रेट ऑफ की जगह पे रेशो का वर्ड आ सकता है, कोई प्रोपोर्शन का वर्ड आ सकता है, या कुछ भी. रेट ऑफ डैश.
However, biologists still don't know how serious the threat to their survival is for each individual species. So a body called the Global Marine Species Assessment is now creating a list of endangered species on land, so they consider things like the size of the population, how many members of one species there are in a particular place, and then they look at their distribution in geographical terms. Although this is quite difficult when you're looking at fish because they're so mobile. And then thirdly, they calculate the rate at which the decline of the species is happening.
Okay, they calculate the rate at which the decline is happening. Answer क्या होगा? Rate of decline. Okay, so correct answer is decline. Okay, question number 38. Aim to assess 20,000 species and make a distribution dash. आंसर आएगा डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन के साथ. डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन चार्ट, डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन मैप, डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन टेबल, डिस्ट्रीब्यूशन समथिंग. ओके.
So far, only 1,500 species have been assessed, but they want to increase this figure to 20,000. For each one they assess, they use the data they collect on that species to produce a map showing its distribution. Ultimately, they will
produce a map showing its distribution. क्या मतलब है? Distribution map. बात समझ रहे हैं ना? To produce a map showing its distribution. तो आंसर हो जाएगा map. All right, let's go on. Question number 39. Recommendations to retain ocean biodiversity. Number of ocean reserves. Establish dash corridors for turtles. कि turtles के लिए कोई रास्ते बनाने हैं. Dash corridors. Let's see.
So, finally, what can be done to retain the diversity of species in the world's oceans? Firstly, we need to set up more reserves in our oceans, places where marine species are protected. We have some, but not enough. In addition, to preserve species such as leatherback turtles, which live out in the high seas but have their nesting sites on the American coast, we need to create corridors for migration, so they can get from one area...
Okay, we need to create corridors for migration. तो क्या create की जगह पे word आ गया establish. Corridors for migration की जगह पे आ गया migration corridors. So answer is migration. All right, question number 40. Catch fish only for the purpose of. अब मछलियां क्यों पकड़ते हैं? एक पर्पस क्या है? खाने के लिए. ठीक है, तो वहां पे खाना लिख के आना है. खे अलिफ खा, नून अलिफ ना, खाना. ईटिंग. ईटिंग पर्पस के लिए पकड़ते हैं, फिर कोई मेडिसिन के लिए पकड़ते हैं, फिर कोई उससे ऑयल वगैरह बनाते हैं. तो डिफरेंट पर्पसेस हैं. तो वो ये बोल रहा है कि कैच फिश ओनली फॉर द पर्पस ऑफ डैश, कि सिर्फ एक मकसद के लिए मछलियां पकड़ने की इजाजत होनी चाहिए.
As well as this, action needs to be taken to lower the levels of fishing quotas to prevent overfishing of endangered species. And finally, there's the problem of bycatch. This refers to the catching of unwanted fish by fishing boats. They're returned to the sea, but they're often dead or dying. If these commercial fishing boats used equipment which was more selective so that only the fish wanted for consumption were caught, this problem could be overcome.
Okay, fish wanted for consumption was caught. So catch fish only for the purpose of consumption. So correct answer is consumption. Okay? All right.